Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media production. If you're new to the channel, we do tips and tricks and hacks and myth busting, and today is kind of none of those things. It's sort of an experiment that I've seen a few drummers do that I wanted to try out personally, so this is kind of a me thing as well. And it is no toms, they're all snare drums. Let's see what happens. At the end of the day, a drum is a drum is a drum, but some of them have snare wires on the bottom, some of them have snare beds on the bottom. We call those ones snare drums, and we decided to set up a rig kind of in the spirit of people like Chris Dave, some other people in the like sort of R&B and like also avant-garde scene. I've seen Jim Black do stuff like this too, where we're distributing snare drums all over the kit that are all tuned really differently to kind of like be treated almost like samples or color variations or just something just out of the ordinary that might be inspirational, might be super confusing. We're just going to kind of feel it out. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario, for helping us out. We're doing the Michael Carvin sticks today, a personal favorite of mine, and particularly fun for this kind of stuff because they're super quick and have little round tips on them that are super articulate. So what are we rocking today? We have the House, or I should say Ben's Acrolite here, which is actually set up kind of as a normal snare drum. It's in a mid to high range. Still has the 42 strand wires on the bottom of it that we put on months ago and decided that that's where they should live. And we have put up our 12-inch Mapex Black Panther up here, which is tuned real high. It's got a UV1 on top, as opposed to our normal kind of like G12 business, and the Acro also has a UV1 on top. Over here, if you've seen recent videos, is my new Baritone snare that Maelo Drums made for me. And we have a hydraulic coated on it, which is super rad. And I don't have a lot of experience with this drum head, but we had one in the shop here, and so I threw it on there with an E-ring, and it sounds crazy. For demonstration purposes, most of this is going to be with all of the snares turned on. So right out of the gate, I'm going to say there's going to be a lot of snare wire racket because there's 3 snare drums right around the bass drum. So if that's a concern for you, you can jump back and check out our previous video that talks about that. Central to which is that it's fundamental to playing drums, so don't worry about it too much. There's things you can do, but there's going to be a fair amount of it here, especially with a low-tuned snare next to a low-tuned bass drum. But also, this affords us unusual sounds with the wires off that are in tom position that you can play some vocabulary that you already have on and get a really, really different sound and a really, really different tactile response too. If you don't, say, play rudimental stuff normally on your rack tom because it's tuned super low, you got a snare drum there, now you can do that. Conversely, with the floor tom, it's such a centered kind of round note because of how tight the bottom head is because it's a snare head. And also with the E-ring on top, it's very pitch fundamental oriented, which is what we're after when the wires are on, and it's what you get when they're off too. So now we're just going to kind of fire off with a bunch of examples that sort of utilize them in different ways. Some of them are going to be sort of like stylistically specific concepts. Others might just be like, what does this beat sound like with this snare instead? Because it may be as simple as using a different snare on the bridge or something like that versus, you know, moving around all of them inside of a single tune. right, so those are all kind of all on the whole time right there. And now let's try out what happens when we mix it up and turn some of them off and leave some of them on, kind of see where that takes us. So what's the point of all of this? First off, because it's a lot of snare drums, it's kind of a weird setup. The idea behind this, for me at least, is to just sort of like kind of throw a wrench in what I'm used to doing and mix up how I move when I'm playing and where I expect certain sounds to be, because we don't want to be just sort of playing rote stuff that we're accustomed to, at least not all the time. Sometimes you need to reach for inspiration. Sometimes you just want to get inspired just for yourself. And this is one of those times where we're taking away a lot of what I'm used to on the kit. And having something tuned super high right here might be an uncomfortable thing for people that are used to playing rock setups. Having something tuned extremely low over here with snare wire noise coming off of it is also kind of disorienting if you're not used to that. And I'm not used to it. It's still very new for me. When you go to do a fill in your mind, especially if you're kind of in the music and experiencing it, and you hear something that's not what you're expecting, that alone can throw you off and maybe mess your phrasing up or just be sort of confusing overall. So anytime that there's a chance to kind of break internal barriers or physical barriers in this case too, that's a great thing to just spend some time with and realize what your habits are and also what things you didn't know might be inspirational and fun for you to check out. Just in terms of fundamentally experimenting, sometimes on stage, current guys that come to mind are definitely Mark Giuliana. He's a big one that'll just set things up in a strange way to see what comes. I also think of Bill Bruford back with King Crimson. Like somewhere I have a magazine with sort of a retrospective of all of his kits in chronological order, and they are nuts. Some of them he's specifically like, I'm going to put stuff up that's the wrong thing to have there traditionally. And if you set it up that way, you're going to sound different. And that's pretty important sometimes. You know, you need to cut your own path. Now, a third option is doubling down, say on like some of the backbeats, having two snares or hitting a different snare inside of a single groove to just kind of create a different sort of arc over it. You know, like back in the day, particularly like James Brown grooves and things, they would mix up where they were striking their rim shot on the snare drum so that maybe the 2 and the 4 didn't quite sound exactly the same. And this can be sort of like a jacked up version of that sort of thing. So there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of things that can push you in a certain direction or maybe remind you of something that you've heard. This is particularly useful, in my opinion, for groove-oriented music where maybe you're playing a lot of different grooves, but they're largely kind of in the same realm and you want to find ways to spice them up without playing different material, just going for different sounds. You might have noticed earlier that we added a auxiliary hi-hat over here, and that is basically for me so that I can play a little more open-handed and be able to get my left hand around. This is going to be a matched grip issue, a traditional grip issue. It's not really about that. It's more just about your hands crossing and making life easy for yourself. I've seen a lot of guys that do mixed snare kits like this, at least having a stack over there or something that's on the staccato side of things that they can play hi-hat or ride material on and have the freedom to move their hands around. Now, if you're already an open-handed player, then you've got all of that real estate to reach around with that hand while you're playing your ride or your hi-hat. But for those of us that are crossing over, this is something to think about. And it really can be anything. It doesn't need to be a nice set of hi-hats. It doesn't need to be hi-hats at all. It's just a matter of realizing that there is sort of a mechanical issue here where you're going to need to be able to use both of your hands in places that they maybe don't normally have to go in the context of a groove. This is also an awesome opportunity to experiment with playing open-handed, which is what I normally do. I don't generally bring a second hi-hat with me to gigs, but I have spent some time figuring out comfortable ways to play open-handed stuff so that I can integrate the floor tom into beats here and there, just because that's a sound that I like. And that's, what leads us to a lot of these technical things, is going after a sound first, and if you want to have like a mixed kick and floor tom thing, you're gonna kind of have to involve your left hand on the hi-hat or some other thing over there if you want to keep the rest of the groove going, and that's already in the groove. And each of these challenges is wonderful too, because it's still just your regular kit for the most part, practicing open-handed, that is. If you want to add snares to it, that makes it even more complicated and kind of crazy. Now, a very real issue with practicing and staying inspired is getting bored with what you're doing. That's a real thing, whether people want to talk about it or not, it happens. And it can really happen, especially when you are feeling pretty good about what you're doing and you're looking for something new to do, not really sure where to start or what to do. And for me, I was never a huge book person. Like, I always have used drum books, but I was never like front to back methodology kind of learner. But changing up sounds would always inspire me and maybe get me to keep practicing when I was younger on something that I was kind of sick of working on. And one route you can go is getting lots more drums. A different route you can go is figuring out how to get different sounds out of them, or just changing up what's in a certain location like this. You can really find a lot of new material in the material you already know how to play by changing orchestrations, which, is one of the things that caused us to start all of this in the first place here, because it is about sound in the end and the sound that you're making, and making small adjustments to the way you play or what you're hitting can make a groove a different groove, where you're playing the same stuff but just orchestrating it differently. And I can't stress enough how important it is to just think about those sorts of things and not just the sticking you're playing or where you learned that lick from. So that pretty much wraps it up. We didn't really go too deep into the tuning and how we treat these 3 snare drums, but if you're interested in that, we actually have specific videos that individually go into the way that we treat each of these snares: the Acrolite, the Soprano, and the Bari. And you can go and watch those to at least get sort of an idea of like where we're coming from with what we go for with drums this size, with this kind of makeup. Again, we're not the sort of people who are after a specific note for an Acrolite every time or anything like that. It's more about looking at the drum, what it wants to do. Likewise with the 12, likewise with the Bari. So I do encourage you to check those out if you're curious about it, and try out what we've done with those drums on whatever drum you happen to have, because you'll probably find something useful even if it's not a Bari or an Acrolite or whatever. Also, please, if you can, go down and follow the link beneath the video to check out our Patreon page, which is going to have, in addition to all of the sort of behind the scenes and extra stuff that's already there, there's going to be material from this too. We always shoot way more footage than we need, and Ben is kind enough to prepare a lot more of it than we need for consumption, and that's kind of where it lives. So if you want to see more playing demonstrations or a little more chatting about, what we were doing here when we decided to do this, what some of the inspirations were, that's where you'll find it. All right, thanks so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe below the video, and hit the notification bell so that you get a notification when we post a video. Even if you're not getting notifications, these are dropping every Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern Time. Thanks again to ProMark by Dodaro for being our presenting sponsor today. And we would love to hear from you about your mixed snare drum setups, even if it's just 2, or if you're messing around with putting, one on this side, or if you've ever experimented with one in the rack position, any of those things, because your inspiration can become other people's inspiration. People read these comments. We definitely read them. We've done a lot here because of comments people have met, like a lot, and we really appreciate it. So keep it going, and we'll see you soon.